Have you ever ridden a coaster that people rave about, but by the time you got off, you were kind of thinking, meh?
We said meh. M-E-H. Meh.
Maybe you even heard me rave about a coaster that you were disappointed in. Rides were not made for everyone's tastes. I've talked about overrated coasters by manufacturer in the past, but today, I'm gonna bring them all together and rank them up. These are America's 15 most overrated coasters. Overrated. Who's rating these? I'm looking toward the general sentiment of the coaster community. I'm not looking at the Golden Ticket Awards. I'm looking at what people say on Instagram and YouTube. If you immerse yourself into this world, you know how most people feel about any given ride. These coasters are the ones that I break away from the norm the most, in the negative direction. But don't worry, later this week, I'll look at this in the positive direction. So don't think I'm some whiny, entitled coaster enthusiast. Even if it's kinda true. All my lists have honorable mentions, so let's look at some of the coasters that I wrote down but it didn't make the top 15. Colossus the Fire Dragon at Lagoon is considered a top-tier Schwarzkopf, but I think its layout is boring and repetitive. Some people even rank this number 2 at the park. I don't think it's even close. Steel Force at Dorney Park is a Morgan hyper that I've gotten nothing from. I've heard it has good airtime, but I've never been able to find it. Wooden Warrior at Quasi was made out to be an insane airtime machine, but once I wrote it, I realized it was just a family coaster. A really good one, but because Quasi is such a small park, I think people got too excited over it. Behemoth at Canada's Wonderland isn't in America, but it's close. And even though a lot of enthusiasts consider it a top-tier B&M hyper, I've always had it near the bottom. Ravine Flyer 2 at Waldemere wasn't in that elite tier of wooden coasters, but it's still a really good ride, so I couldn't put it on the list. And finally, Lightning Rod at Dollywood is my number 6 overall coaster, but I see people ranking it over coasters like El Toro and Steel Vengeance, which I think is crazy, especially after it's been slowed down after the first season. But it's still such a great ride that I couldn't put it on this list. Number 15. Batman the Ride clones at most Six Flags parks. The coaster world loves intensity, and Batman is definitely intense. There's nothing wrong with Batman clones. They do get tiresome when you travel around a place like Texas and you run into 3 of them, but I try not to let that affect my opinion of the ride. I've always thought it was undersized, short, and not that interesting after growing up riding the one at Magic Mountain. Some people value the intensity factor over everything else, but I value size and duration more, so I've always seen these as ordinary, one-and-done coasters. Number 14. Twister at Knoebels. On this coaster's best day, it apparently has some good laterals and maybe positives. I've never ridden it on its best day, but as someone who calls himself Airtime Thrills, a ride that doesn't have a single moment of airtime isn't going to be that great for me. Maybe I'd appreciate it more if I got to experience it with all the forces on a hot day with a full train. Even without the airtime, I am capable of enjoying a forceful ride, even if it's not throwing me out of my seat. So I'll rank this low on the list until I give this a fair shake. But when I see people ranking this over Phoenix in the same park, I think that's a little crazy. Number 13. Boulder Dash at Lake Compounce. I know I said I wasn't going to take the Golden Ticket Awards into account, but 5 for the world's best wooden coaster? Really? I see plenty of people putting this as a top-tier wooden coaster, and maybe that's because of the setting and not much else. If this is true, I get that. The setting is top-notch, riding along the mountain, but the ride itself is rough and forceless, and I didn't get any airtime in the front or the back on the final run of Airtime Hills. I don't think I've seen this ride running at its best either, and I do have it in my top 20 wooden coasters, but it's nowhere near one of my favorites. Number 12. Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City. I've gained a little more respect for the original RMC Woody after getting some rides in this year. It's the only RMC that I've ever ridden where I hit the final brakes for the first time and I thought it wasn't that good. I moved it up from the lowest tier of RMC to the lower middle. Still nowhere near the top. And I still don't believe it deserves the hype it gets. Great drop, great layout, great finale. But it needs some track work, and it's a short ride, so I can't get too excited about it. Number 11. Hang Time at Knott's Berry Farm. When this first opened, everyone seemed to claim that it was the best coaster in the park. I had the opposite reaction after my first ride. I thought it could be another Cannibal, but it felt just like a mild, small B&M looper. It's a great coaster for the general public because it has that beyond vertical drop and all of the inversions twisted up within themselves. But I was underwhelmed. There's a bit of a drop off after the top 2 at the park and the rest, so I thought Hang Time was a solid number 3, but nowhere near Ghost Rider or Accelerator. It seems like people have backed off their praise of hang time a little bit, so it's not that high on this list. Number 10. Mindbender at Six Flags Over Georgia. This reminds me a little bit of Boulder Dash. Maybe people consider it the best Schwarzkopf because of the setting, and I understand that. This uses terrain to perfection, but I thought the ride was forceless. My first ride in 2018 was completely dull, and when I got back in 2019, it was a little better. But compare the positive and negative G's to Shockwave at Six Flags Over Texas, and there's no comparison. But if you ask the coaster world what's the best Schwarzkopf in America, I bet Mindbender would come out on top. Number 9. Maverick at Cedar Point. This is the highest ranked coaster on the list, and that's because it's awesome. Maverick has a ton of fast-paced elements that'll whip you around and throw you out of your seat. I've never loved the restraints. I've talked plenty about those big metal bars in the past, and it's one of the major reasons that I don't rank this in my top 10. I always saw Maverick as a solid supporting coaster, not a potential number 1 overall coaster, or even a top 5 coaster like you see so often with other coaster fans. Number 8. Bizarro at Six Flags Great Adventure. I talk a lot about how I don't like Scream at Magic Mountain, not just because it's a parking lot coaster, and not just because it has a nasty rattle, but because the layout is boring. Scream is a mirrored clone of Bizarro, which was the original B&M floorless. Even with the better setting, the theming within the ride, and the smoother experience, that layout is still boring. It just doesn't seem to have the whippy and forceful elements that I find with Kraken and Medusa. The bells and whistles seem to impress people with Bizarro, and you'll find it at the top of a lot of floorless lists. But for me, it's middle of the pack at best. Number 7. The RMC Raptors at California's Great America and Six Flags Fiesta Texas. Like Maverick, this ranks on my top 50. Just not super high. I don't even think this was built to be the star attraction at a major park. These are my lowest ranked RMCs because they're really short and they have shoulder harnesses. For me, the full-sized RMCs offer a more complete experience, but I can see why people love them. They go through their elements at breakneck speed and offer forces that are hard to find anywhere else. But I just can't rank a 30-second coaster as high as I see them with other people. Number 6. Tremors at Silverwood Theme Park. It's hard for a coaster in northern Idaho to be overrated. Not that many people have ridden it, but ever since I was in high school, I kept hearing about this amazing CCI wooden coaster at Silverwood called Tremors, and how elite it was. Most people still consider it the best ride in the park. I even chose this to be my 400th coaster. I thought it had an interesting layout and a good use of tunnels, especially that first one that goes under the gift shop. But the ride itself wasn't very forceful, and it ran pretty rough. After 2 rides, I had this ranked 3rd in the park, behind Timber Terror and Aftershock. I know that Tremors is a huge draw for people to make the trek to Silverwood, but just don't go in expecting an elite Woody. Number 5. Lightning Racer at Hershey Park. Here's one that I was confused about going in. This had its huge fans, and otherwise wasn't talked much about. Just looking at it, it's impressive. I thought it could be one of the better GCIs. I got my first rides in 2018, and after doing both sides, I thought it was one of the most boring major coasters I've ever ridden. Sure, it races, and it has good interactive moments, but that's it. No forces whatsoever. It's not even rough. It just fails to do anything exciting throughout its layout. After riding again in 2020, my opinion did not change. I see a lot of praise for it, with the occasional comment agreeing that it's a dull ride. But in general, it gets more love than I think it deserves. Number 4. The Beast at Kings Island. It's a classic and an icon, and I appreciate it for that. The ride itself? A lot of straight track and shallow drops. For a coaster built in-house back in 1979, it's incredibly impressive, and I really like the helix off the second lift. But when this missed my top 20 wooden coasters, and barely missed my 5 honorable mentions, I got so many comments asking where the Beast was. I didn't know it had that many fans. I thought I was being generous by ranking it in the top 3rd of my wooden coaster list, but apparently, a lot of people thought that I should have it even higher, but I just can't do it. Number 3. Skyrush at Hershey Park. Before 2020, I wouldn't consider it overrated. I just hated the restraints, and I figured, hey, if they don't bother you, then I'm sure the ride is great. But after 2020, when I got some pain-free rides, I realized that the ride has a lot of filler track for as many good elements as it has. It also wanders around a lot, and it doesn't have a lot of track length to waste. For a ride ranked in most enthusiasts' top 10, I would expect something a little stronger than this. I do enjoy riding Skyrush. It's just not a top 50 coaster. It's barely in my top 100. Number 2. Top Thrill Dragster at Cedar Point. Put this in the same category as the Raptors. It's great at what it does, but the ride is 17 seconds long. That's about half the duration of a Raptor. The launch is insane. Not the most powerful that I've ridden, but hitting that 120 mph mark is a different kind of feeling. Climbing 420 feet into the sky and spiraling down is a crazy rush. This was in my top 50 very recently, but it's gotten pushed out. I see others ranking it in the top 2 or 3 at Cedar Point, but for me, it's a solid 7th. It's worth a ride if you can get on it before it breaks down, but I don't think it's an elite coaster. Number 1. Kumba at Busch Gardens Tampa. Enthusiasts love a good old school B&M, and Kumba is one of their first projects. It was their first large-scale coaster, and they did a great job with it. But when I hear people rank it number 1 at the park, cracking their top 25 lists, it makes me wonder what's so special about it. It has a good layout, with the loop wrapping around the lift, and elements that dive into the ground, under a bridge, interlocking corkscrews into the terrain. It's a very nice looking coaster, but it seems like B&M loopers have their place in the community, and nobody loves them that much. Kumba is the exception, but for me, I see it just like Riddler's Revenge, or Wildfire, or Dominator, all coasters that I enjoy, but I don't have anywhere near my top 50. Kumba is probably my 4th favorite in the park, or maybe 3rd if Cheetah Hunt is having a bad day. There's my list of overrated coasters in America. I hope it didn't come off as too snobbish, but coaster nerds like me take strong opinions on coasters that normal people don't even consider when they go to parks just to have a good time. But in the end, we love coasters and parks, and most of us respect each other's opinions, because after all, they're roller coasters, and they shouldn't be taken too seriously. There are a few other coasters that get brought up on lists like these, and I didn't discuss them because I'm not sure what to do with them. Millennium Force is overrated by some and underrated by others, and I land on the middle on this also, but more on the positive side. Intimidator 305 may not be for me personally, but I see why people love it. Copperhead Strike is a ride that gets too much love and hate, and I don't have a strong opinion either way. Candemonium is some people's favorite hyper, and others see it as one of B&M's weaker ones, and I side more with the latter group, even though it's in my top 50. Orion has its share of fans and detractors. I'm definitely a fan, but I can't blame anyone who wasn't super impressed. Finally, Phoenix is a really fun coaster that deals with unrealistic standards. I can ride this all day, but I don't think it's the best Woody in the world, and I didn't want to make it seem like I was dissing it by putting it on this list. So that's all for now. Let me know what you think about the coasters on this list, what coasters you've ridden that you feel are overrated, and any other thoughts that you have on ranking and judging coasters like this. Put it all in the comments below, and be sure to stay tuned later this week for my 15 most underrated coasters. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.